This podcast is sponsored by the book, The Biased Brain, by Bo Bennett, PhD. Dive into the world of cognitive biases and transform your understanding of reality. Get your copy today at thebiasedbrain.com.
Understanding the subadditivity effect, why our brain adds up too much. Learn about the subadditivity effect, a cognitive bias where our brain overestimates parts, leading to errors in probability and decision-making. The subadditivity effect, why our brains trick us into bad judgments. Hey, have you ever noticed how when people estimate probabilities or risks, the total often ends up being more than 100%? Like if you ask someone to judge the chance of different causes of something, their individual estimates add up to more than they should. This quirky little phenomenon is called the subadditivity effect, and it's a fascinating example of how our brains aren't always the best at handling information even when we think we're being logical. So let me explain this a bit like I would to a friend. Imagine you're at a party, and someone asks, "What are the chances you'll spend money on one of these things in the next month?" The items could be shoes, gadgets, or dining out. If you think about each category separately and assign a probability, like 30% for shoes, 40% for gadgets, and 50% for dining out, you might say it's likely you'll spend money on something, right? But wait, if you add those probabilities up, you get on 20%, which is impossible. The right answer shouldn't exceed 100%, since that's the total probability of any event actually happening. This overestimation is the subadditivity effect at work, where probability judgments for parts of an event tend to add up to more than the whole event's probability. It's one of those odd quirks in human cognition that reveals just how biased our minds are when processing pieces of information separately versus as a whole. Why does this happen, though? Well, our brains have a natural tendency to break down information into chunks and evaluate each piece independently rather than holistically. This makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. We use mental shortcuts to handle complexity quickly. But the downside is that this kind of thinking introduces a bias in decision-making, making our judgments less accurate. In other words, when you consider parts separately, you tend to inflate their individual importance, failing to recognize that some overlap or mutual exclusivity means the total can't logically be more than 100%. It's like mentally failing to do the accounting right. Here's a quick example to make it clearer. Ask yourself, what's the chance you'll see a crime on the news tomorrow? You might say 40%. Now, if you break that down into violent crime and property crime, you might say 30% for violent crimes and 40% for property crimes. Oops, that's 70% in total, but 40% if you asked about crimes in general, so the separate parts add up to more than the whole. This is because people estimate parts differently than wholes, losing track of how parts relate to the unitary event. Understanding cognitive biases like this helps us develop better critical thinking skills and challenges us to consider context rather than isolated details. It's neat to realize that our biased brain isn't just a failure but a product of mental shortcuts and survival needs. Still, in modern life where data and probabilities are everywhere, spotting these biases becomes important, especially when making decisions ranging from financial investments to healthcare choices. If these kinds of topics interest you, and you want a more comprehensive understanding of how bias shapes human cognition, I highly recommend checking out the book The Biased Brain by Bo Bennett, PhD. It covers a whole range of cognitive biases and explains why our minds work the way they do, all in a really accessible way. Trust me, the insights from that book are game-changing if you want to improve your bias in decision-making and sharpen your critical thinking. Explore the book and unravel the secrets of your mind today. It's a great step toward becoming more aware of your own thinking patterns and less prone to common psychological traps. So next time you find yourself estimating probabilities or trying to break down a complex choice, keep the subadditivity effect in mind. It's a reminder that sometimes seeing the whole picture is a lot trickier than it seems.